Hey guys, I'm Jeremy, and here's my trip in South America. This was the last part of a long trip I was on around the world, so I have to be honest that I didn't really care for it too much, and I'll explain kind of why I didn't like it in some ways. But ironically, I'm also probably going to go back there next year and spend at least half the year there, and maybe over the next 10 years, most of my time down there. So hopefully my attitude on this changes. So anyway, here's the experience of my trip and some of my feelings about the area. So in general, one of the hard things was that I had already been traveling for like 3 years, and initially that trip was only going to be about a year, but I got ran over in China, and then I ended up working there for a while. I had to work in Nepal until winter was over so I could get through Pakistan to China. I went back home, I did commercial fishing to get more money, so yeah, it was definitely a lot longer than I thought. So by the time I got to South America, honestly, I was burned out, and this is something you got to think about if you're going to do these long trips. Like, I don't know if going more than like a year at a time or something is super enjoyable, but to each their own. And then of course the other difficult thing for me was that I don't speak Spanish. And if you're in bigger cities, there's some young people who know English, but I was obviously in smaller towns, and so no one knows English pretty much in any of these little towns. Basically, most of this bike trip was going from in Argentina near Mendoza up to La Rioja. So it was like 500 miles. And then I did a little bit up Uruguay into Brazil, like around Florianopolis. But yeah, there's no one that knows English pretty much. And the previous places I was at, like in the Middle East, Africa, and a lot of places in Asia, you'll get a little more English. The only other spot where you really don't have much English is like Central Asia, because they have their local language, and then Russian's the second language. So I had just finished my trip in Africa. I flew from Cape Town to Santiago, and I hung out there for a few days, which is really pretty. It's kind of like, I felt more like I was in like Italy or Spain. I guess I was assuming it was maybe a little more undeveloped, but it was quite developed. And I think Chile is probably the most wealthy country in that region. They have some nice markets, you get ceviche, and they have some nice wineries and things. And so I was only there for a few days, and then I could have obviously biked from there up until the top of the Andes, where the border is of Argentina and Chile, but I knew that would be a long uphill. So I ended up, I think, biking out a little bit, and then I got a ride from a guy, and he took me up to like basically the top of the pass. And I'll tell you, I stopped at a restaurant there, and I've never really been like a big fan of steak. Like, I never knew like why people are like love steak. Like, I always thought it was average. And part of that's probably because my mom always got like the cheapest stuff back in the day. But Argentina is known to have really good steak. And yeah, after that trip, I was like, now I understand why steak is so amazing. And then they have a lot of other decent food too, like pastas, empanadas, and things. Nothing like super special like Asia or something like that, but pretty decent. There's no doubt the scenery in this area is super beautiful. It reminded me a lot of Tibet. And actually, ironically, the movie 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt, they actually ended up filming it in that area, because they were going to try to film it up in India, in Ladakh, like right near Tibet, because the scenery is similar. And the Chinese government gave so much pressure to India that they ended up pulling out and filmed most of it then in Argentina. So super pretty, but also super remote. Like, you go out in these areas and, over the next couple weeks or whatever, it was like you get on some dirt roads and stuff, and you wouldn't see one person or a car almost the entire day. I think I had like one section, maybe 112 kilometers without seeing anyone. So keep that in mind to have some extra supplies, because most of the other areas I've traveled around the world, there's like tons of people and all over the world. Any part of China and stuff like that I go to, there's people around or shops. But out there, man, it can get really remote. I did see a few other cyclists out there, and I cycled with a couple, a British guy and an Irish guy for a little bit. And so that was kind of cool, because like I said, I couldn't really talk to anyone too much, and they knew a little Spanish, which helped. And along the way, I did a couple other little things. Like I did go rafting near Rodeo. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And I met some like local guys there, and they said, they had a rafting business and a place to stay. So that was kind of neat. And then, I just headed up towards La Rioja. And the other frustrating thing too in this part of the world, like, they have the Siesta. And so I assumed it was like, around the afternoon, things were closed for 2 or 3 hours or maybe even more. But it was like they're open around noon, and maybe some places don't open until 6, and maybe a restaurant doesn't open until 9 o'clock at night. So that was kind of frustrating. Like if you'd arrive in town after like 1 o'clock, like everything was closed till 6. Every store, every shop. If I wanted to go to the library to check my email or something like that, or use the internet, it was closed. They sometimes have dinner real late at like 9, 10 o'clock, and have drinks and stuff till 4 in the morning. And maybe when I was in my early 20s, that would have been fun, but I don't like to be out quite that late, especially if I'm going to cycle the next day. And I also had another kind of flaky situation, and I think it was in La Rioja or somewhere there, and I messaged a couch surfer, some girl in that town. I was like, oh yeah, I'm coming through. Do you want to hang out or something? And, in the center of every town, you've got like a central like park, and there's like a church and stuff like that. So it's an easy place for us to meet. And I told her, let's say I was going to meet at like 3. And I'm going to be right at that church, like with my bike or whatever. And I waited like a half hour or something like that. And I sent a message, and it was like, oh, well, I wasn't sure if you were going to be there, so I didn't show up. I was like, what? Why would you say you'd meet me and then not show up? And then she said, okay, yeah, I'm going to come down. I'm late or something. And she just basically never ended up showing up. She was like, yeah, I wasn't sure if you'd be there or something. And I was like, just don't tell me you're going to meet me. That's cool if you don't want to meet or anything. I had one funny situation where, we're somewhere in the desert there, and I think I just had my sandals on, and, there's some thorns out there in some of the areas, and I guess the stick was down on the ground. I might have even gone off the dirt road, maybe to go to the bathroom or something like that, and I stepped on a thorn that was like an inch long, and so I immediately braced with my other foot to, put the pressure on the other foot. I stepped on another thorn, and so I just like, damn it, and I just like kind of buckled my legs, like, and I just fell to my knees basically. And I even want to think that like it got in one of my knees too, so it was just all over this ground here. It was just like, I've seen thorns over the years and stuff like that, but nothing like really solid, really sharp and strong that would, go into you like that. So be careful of that for walking or for your tires. So after that section, I headed over to Buenos Aires for a couple days and hung out there, and that seemed like a real fun spot, but I didn't spend too much time. And then I left Buenos Aires, and then I headed over towards Montevideo in Uruguay, and then I went up the coast like a few more days towards Brazil, and that was really nice. The country's flat, and I was, on the coast, which, it's pretty and everything, but I definitely like the mountains more, so the Argentina side and the Andes Mountains is definitely nicer. And plus, the bad thing on the coast, a lot of people like flat areas, but it's like you get crazy headwinds. So that was kind of tough for a few days. And then I went up into Brazil a bit, and I checked out Florianopolis, and then I ended up going up to Sao Paulo, where I saw my buddy from high school who is from there and moved back there. So, and Brazil was really cool, super diverse, super different. Like, I definitely would have wanted to spend more time. But like I mentioned, I was not only burned out from traveling, but I was trying to do my second trip up to Alaska to go commercial fishing. So the summer before that, I went up, and it wasn't too bad. I did make a few $1,000s at least, enough to get most of that trip funded for that like 3 or 4 months. And then I was going to try to go back, which I did. And you could look at the video for that for more, but it didn't work out too well. Luckily, my third time going up there, I made some money. But yeah, that's another saga. So I finished that bike trip around the world. I did my first trip in 2002 across the U.S. 2003, I did New Zealand. And then 2006, I started in Thailand. And that's when I got hit in China. And so, yeah, I went across Asia, the Middle East, a little bit of Africa and South America. Probably around 30,000 kilometers, almost 20,000 miles, I think. So yeah, a lot of biking. And I'm glad I did it, but I don't know if I'd do many long distance bike trips. Mostly because I've been hit twice. But yeah, I just don't like the traffic. So although there was a couple annoying things about South America, like as far as the siestas and kind of flakiness that I noticed, and I didn't know Spanish, so that's my own fault, of course. And I also never really considered like living there much because of course you can't make much teaching English, which is most of what I did over the last 15 years in Asia. But I've really warmed up to the idea lately because I got into much more hiking again. 20 years ago I did the Appalachian Trail, and then I mostly got into cycling, and I didn't really get into hiking until recently. So regardless of how the culture is in any of these places, even whether I'm in China or in Argentina or Peru or whatever, it's like I'm just mainly going there for the outdoors, for the mountains, the hiking, the alpine lakes. There's still good food, it's cheap. So I could overlook like some of the annoyance things of like people being late or something like that. It's not really going to be a big deal. So I hope to enjoy it, and I hope in fall to have saved enough money to do at least like Mexico, Colombia, and Peru, and to spend quite a bit of time in Peru exploring on motorcycle, and then some hiking trips. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully I'll have some cool videos in the next year of that. So anyway, that wraps up my world cycling trip. I'll have a few more videos on some tips for you guys if you're a beginner, why I wanted to cycle around the world, and some negative things about cycling around the world, like getting hit by a car or the other annoyances that happen. So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.